We are live. Yes, we are live. Let's see.
We are live. I can see it. I'm watching us on my phone.
Welcome, everyone. Amanda Joy Ravenhill here. Honored to be the Executive Director at Buckminster Fuller Institute. And today we have a special event here. We're with our Regenerosity team. Regenerosity is a project of Buckminster Fuller Institute and Lush Cosmetics and some other bold regenerates out there in the world. Our goal is really to mobilize resources and enable learning to help inspire the regenerative movement. We're accelerating regenerative practices all over the world by mobilizing all forms of capital, including financial capital and technical support for all the high integrity projects that we've identified through our various challenge and prize programs. We've also partnered with the UN Development Program and their Equator Prize. And the idea is really to marshal resources to these projects while also learning and kind of decolonizing our minds and unlearning different ways that we've done development in the past. So we've been doing these monthly webinars, and our last one was on how to scale regeneratively and how to kind of, be able to respond to these urgent times by scaling these projects, but trying to do it in a way that is more of a living systems inspired approach. And so together with many people from around the world who tuned into the event, we came up with these 10 pathways to scale regeneratively, and we're excited to share them all with you today. Thanks for tuning in. I'll pass it on to you, Ruth.
Thank you. So I think it's just worth saying that usually scaling and regeneration don't come together in the same phrase, and it often feels like those concepts are, too different. But we want to show that there is a way to look at scaling and amplifying impact and growing our capacity to deliver regeneration in a way that, as Amanda said, is more aligned to healthy living systems. So to begin with, I think one important path is to reawaken Indigenous and traditional knowledge. So in the minority world, or in the global north, we can say, most of our communities are many generations removed from the wisdom of our ancestors who were really connected to the earth and knew how to be good stewards of life. But even though we feel so distant from that Indigenous and traditional knowledge, as you all know, there are many communities around the world that, despite colonialism and despite globalization and despite COVID-19 now as well, killing many elders, for example, in the Amazon, that there are many elders still alive. Their stories alive. There are remaining memories that are coded in the culture, in songs, in cooking, in ways of growing food. And then what is called the traditional ecological knowledge is now growing again in presence and popularity. And one way to scale is just to reawaken that traditional knowledge and that Indigenous knowledge in communities around the world, like support the awakening, support the storytelling. So yeah, how can we create this bridge between existing practices, stories, rituals, ways of knowing connected to ancient cultures that already worked regeneratively with the land and the water and the soil, together with projects that we are doing now and together with what we're trying to do now. All right, I'll pass it on to Amanda.
Thanks. So a second way that we can scale regeneratively is all about changing culture and mindsets. So Donella Meadows, in her great book, Thinking in Systems, identified that the most impactful leverage point to intervene in a system is at the level of culture, or mindsets, essentially our paradigm. So one way that we can scale regeneratively is by shifting the mindset and the culture of everyone who's involved in a project, including funders, and shifting to a mindset that is more in tune with living systems. This is a journey, not a destination. We have really no idea just how mechanistic and kind of reductionist our views are. And so it's a mess to kind of untangle. But if we can do this, humbly together over the next decade, as we globally transform trillions of financial capital into natural capital, we can also grow the cultural capital in the funders and everyone involved in a project. And this enables us to understand nature at a deeper level. And, by expanding our worldview, we can do two things, at least. One of them is identifying the seeds of regenerative culture that already exist within the current dominating culture, but then also find, mirrors to identify the potential blind spots that exist in the current dominating culture. So that's the second pathway that we've identified around changing culture and mindsets.
Hi, everyone. My name's James. And another consideration as we approach the issue of scaling with regenerative projects is that as funders, when we talk about scaling, what we're actually asking is this project replicable? We're actually talking about replicability. However, within regenerative design, so much about the projects is embedded in the uniqueness of place and in the culture. And also actually in the process of designing and running projects. Regenerative design is so process driven. No two bioregions, no two ecosystems or people or cultures are exactly the same. Each place and each culture is unique. And also that means each design emerging from place is so unique. So in essence, we can't simply replicate projects, but instead we should be looking for how can we adapt? What are the opportunities for adaptability here? So what can we learn from individual projects that can, where we can adapt their successes to other regions and spaces? And how can we make it accessible and appropriate for different cultures as well too? So going for adaptability instead of replicability.
Another pathway to scaling regeneratively is about discovering potential and finding trim tabs. So, one of the key principles of regenerative design is about finding leverage points. As we spoke to earlier, the leverage point of mindsets, but there's all sorts of leverage points to intervene in a system. You can kind of think of them as acupressure points, or as we say in permaculture, the maximum result for minimum effort. And that's the sweet spot that Buckminster Fuller called trim tabs. So a trim tab is a little point on a rudder of a ship, and it's where kind of the smallest movement, the least amount of effort causes the biggest changes or the greatest effect in a system. And so the task at hand is really to find strategies that can demonstrate new ways of thinking, and really create these outsized ability to increase a community's potential. So instead of kind of coming in with, we have the solutions, it's really about finding what potential and capacity already exists within a community, what's kind of the unique genius of that place, and enabling that to rise up so that we can essentially hold more life. So we can hold more human life, more animal life, more biodiversity, more cultural abundance, plant life, all of it. So we learned in our webinar from this group called Alep in India, and they use the trim tabs of old water tanks. And so they found that when they regenerated these water tanks, they brought very tangible benefits of reversing drought and igniting economy, but then they also were able to create cultural connection and reawaken Indigenous knowledge and help develop the potential of the landscape there. So essentially this discovering potential and finding the trim tabs comes down to the question of how many problems can you either solve or dissolve or resolve through one single intervention.
Beautiful, thanks, Amanda. So the fifth pathway is I'll believe it when I see it. So this old adage of I'll believe it when I see it is the reason why so many projects start with a pilot or demonstration site. There there are these high leverage spaces that can be used not only to show alternative practices, but also to train and build capacity around those practices. So focusing on immediately visible value and new approaches can bring help that create interest and increase the willingness to engage, making these cascading benefits more visible.
Great. Yeah, I think another pathway is how are we going to spread the knowledge? Is spread knowledge and learning in relevant and agile ways. And at the heart of a lot of regenerative practice and regenerative development is the principle of increasing capacity and capability of living systems to evolve and generate more value. And this often starts with developing the capacity of people and the also unique genius of the people involved in the projects. So we advise, and from our conversations, we understood this concept of designing into programs spaces for reflection, for learning, for exchange, for evolution in a way that's constantly growing people's capacity and constantly growing people's capacity to support scaling. And a very common strategy, especially around permaculture projects, is to train multipliers. So you train multipliers that are then going to engage new participants, new communities, bringing online, or not online, sometimes offline, but bringing together more and more people around a shared understanding and a shared framework and a shared approach. So it's very common to have this train of trainers. However, it's super important to have a place where the trainers can integrate that learning, involve the programs, cross-pollinate, and adapt to their own circumstances and their own unique cultures and unique challenges. We also talked a little bit about transferring knowledge in ways that are culturally sensitive and culturally relevant. So one of the groups that actually presented that day, BASD from Bangladesh, they created lots of songs to spread good practice around COVID-19 in vulnerable communities that are often illiterate. And we're also connected to a group that is developing a radio program for teaching permaculture. So yeah, how do we spread knowledge and learning in ways that are relevant and culturally sensitive?
Another element, Amanda was talking earlier about changing culture and changing the paradigm. And I mean, one of the limiting factors of many regenerative projects as they search for funding opportunities for scaling is this difference in worldview and paradigm. Regenerative projects often take this really holistic and whole systems approach. And to be honest, often this doesn't really fit within a lot of funders' strategies and funding aims. So the long-term work is to help evolve those philanthropic practices and those overarching strategies. But in the shorter term and in the meantime, it can be useful to invite in those bridge builders, those people who understand both paradigms. You could think of them almost as regenerative translators, maybe. And they can be those people who can help adapt the requirements of funders to the needs of the projects, and also the other way around. So supporting that translation between those paradigms.
Thank you, James. Another pathway that we found is the opportunity to resource and support projects at higher levels of scale. One challenge is that over time and as they grow, regenerative projects develop toward more complexity, more maturity, and more diversity as well. So it's important to remember that scale can be achieved not only by growing one initiative, but by weaving initiatives together at the level of the larger systems, or as we like to call them, the larger wholes that the projects are nested in. So when thinking about funding projects at scale, it's beneficial to think about capacity building, governance, how to develop stronger collaborations at higher and higher levels of scale than the project itself, which also implies learning the fundamental skills of networking and weaving and collaboration. It also implies identifying and designing strategies to meet common needs, to develop common dreams, and to overcome common barriers at a network level. And in turn, when we do that, we can increase the impact of many initiatives all at once and get the real leverage and economies of scale that we're all looking for.
So right now is more powerful of a time for putting the hounds of the power into the hands of the people. There's no better way of scaling a project than to increase sovereignty, independence, and self-determination for people. They are the keepers of these projects. For a long-term regeneration and growth, it's paramount for design projects to have that shared power at their core of their principles. And through these initiatives that address these land rights and land access, strategies that develop commons and shared infrastructure and support of community level governance, we can start to put the power back into the hands of the people.
And we know that when we think about regeneration, we think about many different types of capital. And one type of capital, of course, is financial capital. And the reality in many projects is that even when they are able to access funds, many initiatives lack the experience, the capacity of managing large amounts of financial capital and resources. And that can be a challenge, of course, especially as projects reach a higher level of scale. And we can all start thinking about it early in the life cycle of a project. And at the early stages of a project, to start identifying talent in local organizations and communities who can be supported in building financial management skills, capacity, knowledge. In the case of more participatory approaches, a team can start with small sums of money. So all stakeholders can build a trust in the process and use these opportunities in a highly developmental way. And trust is the key word here. In many of these communities, it's really about building solidarity and building the capacity to share resources, including financial resources, and trust each other that will make good use of these resources. And then eventually, and this can help to break the cycle of dependence, of course, from external inputs, especially when it comes to finance, initiatives and communities should be encouraged and supported to create their own funds and their own financial instruments. Ultimately, this will help them gain autonomy, agency, self-determination, and ultimately help us all make the best use of these resources and truly decolonize wealth. And Amanda, do you want to say something in closing?
I'd love to.
Or Faith, apologies.
So we put the link down below, but if you join us on Regenerosity.World, you can learn more about our programs. We invite you to come and be an ally with us. If you go to the support page, you can join our mailing list and also donate directly to the projects that we're working with. We've been doing these monthly webinars to learn and unlearn and try to decolonize our minds, all of our forms of capital. Our next one is about how do we really resource Indigenous frontlines projects in the most high integrity way possible. So we'll be focusing on some projects in the Amazon. I don't know if people are aware, but the Amazon's on fire again. And it's really important that we work to resource and shift financial capital to people who are on the front lines and do so in a way that really foments more trust and understanding with all involved, as we've spoken to today. So that's what we'll be exploring on September 24th at 9 a.m. You can go to our website and sign up for our mailing list, and we'll send you the invite once we have it up. And thanks everyone so much for tuning in. There's a lot of content here, a lot to chew on. We've also put a link to the article if you want to read it on our website there, and curious to learn and unlearn with you. So please, any and all critique and feedback and ways that we're using words or ways that we're framing that might not be the most living systems oriented as possible. We are here to untangle ourselves from the web of mechanistic thinking and oversimplification and reductionism. So yeah, we're all ears. And yes, from our hearts to yours, thank you so much for also being dedicated to this global metamorphosis that we're in, so that we can all become keystone healers, keystone species within our ecosystems, and healers and gardeners rather than predators in this critical time. Thank you all.